You guys, I am absolutely in love with my Levana Shawl. I love the colors. I love the texture of the stitches. I love the shape and how it wraps really nicely around, but I wanted it in a slightly more neutral color palette. And I have this yarn in my stash, and I love that it goes with my other shawl. It's got the greens and it's got the teals. It's even got some navy gorgeousness. And so I decided to go ahead and make another shawl in this different yarn. So I have 2 skeins of this. That's what I'm going to use for my shawl. I've already made some decisions about what I'm going to do to modify it, and let me show you why I have to modify it. So my Levana Shawl was worked up in a sport weight yarn. I think a lot of people think there's no difference between sport weight and fingering weight, and I'm here to tell you there is. You can see there's a pretty significant difference between my sport weight yarn that I originally used and my fingering weight yarn that I'm going to use. So I knew that this yarn wasn't going to be a perfect fit for this shawl. So I'm already knowing I'm going to make some modifications. One of the modifications I'm going to do is I've decided you should be so proud of me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to swatch. I am automatically going up a hook size because of my finer yarn in hopes that I will just match gauge. I'll be real honest with you, I'm not super duper concerned about matching gauge spot on because it is a shawl and I don't need a super specific fit. The other thing is I have extra yardage, so again, I don't need to worry about running out. I have no idea if I am going to use more yarn because my yarn is finer or not, but I have, let's see, each of these skeins has 437 yards and my shawl takes about 600 yards. So I have significantly more yarn here than I need for my shawl. So if I have extra, I'm super excited to try adding repeats of my sections to make a really giant shawl, hopefully. So I'm super excited to give that a try. So I am going to go ahead and gauge swatch just to see if I'm in the ballpark. Like I said before, I'm not super concerned with gauge. If I'm a little off because it's a shawl, I don't think it's a big deal. I'm not going to be too upset if the fit isn't exact. So I'm going to dive in with the swatch listed in the pattern and we'll see how it goes. All right, so I've only worked 3 rows, but I'm feeling pretty good about it. So I'm going to work the full swatch and we'll see how it turns out. All right, so this is my swatch, and it's a great example of why you want to do a bigger swatch than just the 4 by 4 inches. You can see from the beginning, my stitches definitely changed a little bit from when I was just starting to when I really got in a groove with the stitches. So always make a bigger swatch and measure in the middle of the swatch. Making a gauge swatch, often our goal is to meet a certain size, which is important, but I think there are 3 things you should really be looking for when you're making a gauge swatch. 1, size. 2, do you like the way your yarn looks worked up in the stitches? Because different stitches work yarn differently, so it's good to look at your swatch and say, you may say, oh, that's pooling weird, I don't really like those colors, whatever it is. So look at the colors. Do you like how they look? I love this. I love working with hand-dyed yarn because you switch between colors. It's always, it just, even in the simplest stitches, keeps me interested. And then the other thing you need to look at is fabric. I should block my swatch. I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to. Because I'm not too concerned with size and because I have lots of extra yarn. That's why. If I was really concerned with size or I was worried that I was going to run out of yarn, it would be a good idea to block your swatch just like is indicated in the pattern so that you don't run out of yarn or you don't end up with a wildly different sized shawl. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a measure and see where we're at. So if I count out my stitches here, I'm counting each V stitch as a stitch as indicated by the gauge in the pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm supposed to have 5 stitches and I have 6. So that means that all of my stitches are more narrow than the pattern, which means as I get started, my wingspan isn't going to be as wide. That doesn't concern me too much because, as I said, I'm going to try to giant size it, which means I'm going to hopefully add several more sections and repeats, and so it'll be plenty wide. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows, which meets gauge to the pattern. So super common that you will meet rows and not stitches or stitches and not rows. Check out my Gauge Master series on YouTube to learn more about that. But again, since this is just kind of an experiment and I'm feeling very go with the flow, I think I'm just gonna go with it and see what I come up with. I can, to adjust for the stitch discrepancy when I block, I can make sure I block out some more, and that will make my stitches match more. Of course, that will shorten my row height. So all things to keep in mind. I wanted to check in about my shawl that I'm modifying here. I'm super excited about how it's turning out. First of all, I love working with hand-dyed yarns. I feel like each and every stitch brings like new color variations. It's so gorgeous. This yarn has a little bit, let's see if I can find it, a little bit of maroon in it, which like I didn't even see until I was stitching away. It's just so much fun. So I just started my final repeat of the wider section, And this is where I'm at on my first skein of yarn. I have a whole nother skein to skein up. Like I said before, I'm gonna just, the pattern just keeps repeating. So as long as you're comfortable with just continuing on in the same manner, you can easily make this shawl bigger. And so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna keep going and going. It feels to me, though I haven't measured it, and I did not measure my original shawl before I blocked it, it feels a little more narrow to me, which is interesting and could just be like, I don't know, totally untrue. Because when I did my swatching, my gauge was, the stitches were tighter and the row height was right on. So I don't know. We'll see. Again, fun adventure. I have plenty of this yarn. I'm really excited to make this even bigger. And I am a petite person. So if the length of it, the depth is a little shorter, I'm totally fine with that, because super deep shawls can be really bulky and overwhelming on my shorter body. So, so I'm really loving it, and I cannot wait to see how big it gets. Just real quick, I wanted to pop in and give you a little update. I have finished my fingering weight shawl to the same dimensions as my sport weight shawl, or to the same point in the pattern. I told you I want to continue on because I have more yarn and just make it really gigantic, but I was super curious. I'm going to end up frogging my last 2 rows here, but I was really curious to see how the yardage compared from the sport weight to the fingering weight. Keep in mind, my gauge was not exactly spot on, though it was very close. But part of the reason I'm doing this modification is because I think a lot of people have fingering weight yarn, not as many people have sport weight yarn. So I wanted to be able to just compare how do they behave? Do you need a lot more yardage? And the answer is a little bit. The original sport weight shawl calls for 600 yards total. That's gives you a little extra to play with. And where my fingering weight shawl is at, I have used about 625 yards of yarn. So a little different. I'm having fun seeing how it's coming out in one color versus 2. So I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to frog back to this last row here, and I'm just going to continue on repeating the pattern of the more open stitches, the braided stitch, the more solid stitches, and the braided stitch until I think I get close to the end of my yarn and need to wrap it up. But you can see this is what I have left of my skein right now. So I have quite a ways to go. If you're going to give this a try, do keep in mind each repeat is going to take more and more yarn because you're continuously growing bigger and bigger. So I can't wait to see how far I can get. We'll see. I think I'm almost done. Well, I know I'm almost done because I only have a little bit of yarn left. So I'm very excited. The pattern stopped 1, 2, 3, 4, right here. So it finished with this row and then added the border. So I got it was only a partial repeat of this open part of the shawl. This is 6 row repeat, and on the shawl pattern it's only 4 to finish it out because that was the yarn I had left. I wanted to make sure that in the sport weight I kept it at 2 skeins of yarn. I didn't want to go beyond that. So I did 4 row repeat and then put the border on. So I've got a full 3rd repeat. So 1 repeat, 2 repeat, and then a full 3rd repeat with my fingering weight yarn. I have worked 1 row across, and now I'm debating. This is what I have left. I'm not sure I have enough to do another row back and then the border, because every row gets longer and takes more yarn. And this braided row right here, which is what's used to create the border around the edge of the shawl, eats up a lot of yarn, because whereas these are open stitches, the little border goes every single stitch, which I'm at a significant number of stitches right now. So I think I'm going to go ahead and weigh my ball of yarn and figure out about how many yards I have left, and then debate in my brain if that's enough to go back and then do the 2 rows of the border. The tricky part is if I decide that I don't have enough yarn to go back, then I'm going to have to cut my yarn and start over at this end and do another right side facing row. The first row of this and the first row of the border always needs to have right side facing, and then you finish off with a wrong side facing row. So I can't just add the border onto this row. I'll have to cut my yarn at this end, attach it at the other end, and make another right side row, which would add extra ends to weave in. But really, in the grand scheme of things, I had far fewer ends to weave in the solid color than the striped anyways. And if I don't have enough yarn, I don't have enough yarn. And this is a colorway by a dyer who's not even dyeing anymore. So I'm definitely not getting more of this yarn. So I'm going to go weigh this and we'll see. I've done the math. I have about 105 yards left. And on my smaller shawl, one of the really fun things that pattern includes is yardage for every repeat, so that if you want to make like a massively stripy shawl, you've got all the yardage in there. So for my final braid on my shawl that stopped about here, I needed 45 yards to do that final braid. I have 105, but my shawl is significantly wider now. So, oh boy, I think I'm going to risk it. I think I'm going to go back and do one more row of my open V-stitches here, one more row, and see if I can get, it'll be evident. If I can get back across, then that last row, as long as I'm not cutting it super close, once I get back across, I should be home free. So we'll see. We'll see. I'll let you know. Do I have to frog that row and cut my yarn and go back? We shall see. Oh my goodness. I just thought of something that in theory seems super smart. We'll see if it works. I'm going to work half the row of my open stitch and see how much yardage I have left. If doubling that is going to put me too close to the definitely more than 45 yards I know that I need to do my border, then I only have half a row to rip back instead of 2 whole rows. On a quest to see if I had enough yarn, I started my second row in this corner, worked all the way, look at how giant this is getting, all the way down to the midpoint. and I used 8 grams to get to the midpoint. So I'll use another 8 grams then, in theory, to get back to my other end, which is 16 of my 24 grams that I had left. So I definitely do not think I have enough to go down and then do my border. So I'm going to go with my first plan, I think. I was kind of looking at my yarn shelf, looking like, do I have a little scrap that I could do the border in? A contrasting border might be fun, but I do really like that this is like all the same. So I think I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to frog back to the end of this row, cut my yarn, go back to the other end with the right side facing, and work my border. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all done. You guys, she's all done. She's blocked. For blocking, I have a superwash wool, merino wool yarn here, and I think it was a merino nylon blend. So I soaked it. So I wet blocked it, and then I laid it out on my blocking mats and I shaped it. I ended up just pinning kind of down the center to make sure that the center line stayed straight. And then I just shaped it with my hands to make sure that the braids were nice and straight. I kind of eyeballed it to make sure it was even from side to side. And that's it. I kind of like gently extended. I don't want to say stretched because I didn't like yank on anything. I just really gently like made sure that all of the stitches were extended to their full beauty. And then I left it there to dry. So no like aggressive blocking or major stretching going on. Just laid it out really nicely. And she's enormous. Like I said, she was going to be, and I'm really super thrilled this fall. And even this summer, like if I had a wedding to go to or something fancy, which I don't, but if I did, this would be great to have with me to wrap around my shoulders, to keep me nice and comfortable going out in the evening or into air conditioning. This would be just really, really lovely. And so I ended up using approximately 918 yards of fingering weight yarn to finish my whole project. Measurement wise, the shawl ended up to be 21 inches deep and to have a wingspan, so all the way from, if you've seen my pictures of my Levana shawl, it's almost like a V shape, or like it's not really a heart. It's like a V shape that kind of curls in at the ends a little bit. And so that whole wingspan across from one curl down the middle and across to the other curl is about 78 inches. I almost said yards. That would be ridiculous. It's about 78 inches. So I'm so glad I did this. I'm going to wear this like crazy. and it was just so much fun to see how it would turn out. I hope you learned a thing or two from my modification of my shawl, and that it gives you the confidence to go forward and adventure in making modifications to patterns yourself, especially if you are thinking, oh, I love that shawl, but I'd rather do it in fingering weight yarn. Here you go. This is what you need to do. So much fun. If you found this interesting and helpful, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications so you get notified whenever I post a new video. Like this video, share it with a friend, sign up for my newsletter, all the things. I would love, love, love it and appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you make a shawl, whether you modify it or not, I would love to see it. So send me a picture in your email or tag me on social media. I would just be thrilled. Thank you again for joining me, and happy crafting.